Debbie Reynolds was America's sweetheart, with a career spanning almost 7 decades. But not many know she hid some dark secrets. Shortly before her death, she uttered 6 disturbing words that are so prophetic, they're impossible to forget. But more on that later. Born in 1932 as Mary Frances Reynolds, and during the height of the Great Depression, Debbie Reynolds' family barely had enough money. Reynolds herself was a downright tomboy who loved sports and didn't care for fancy clothes. But when she was 16, she took a chance and entered the Miss Burbank Beauty Contest. Talent scouts from both Warner Brothers and MGM witnessed the blossoming potential in Reynolds and jumped at the chance to sign her. In the blink of an eye, Debbie Reynolds went from nerdy schoolgirl to prized starlet. Instead of starting a bidding competition, Warner Brothers and MGM simply flipped a coin. Warner Brothers won the toss and immediately signed Reynolds. Debbie Reynolds had a lot of rough edges to iron out, and she later admitted, "When I started, I didn't even know how to dress. I had no money, no taste, and no training." Warner Brothers also wasn't sold on her name, Mary Frances Reynolds. Mary Frances Reynolds became Debbie Reynolds after many compromises. She adamantly refused to change her last name, but finally surrendered her first name. A new name for a new life. In one of her first pictures, the daughter of Rosie O'Grady, Reynolds faced a burning humiliation. The studio thought her ears were too big and had the makeup department glue her ears to the side of her head. To add insult to injury, the glue would dissolve under the hot lights on set, popping her ears back out. After Warner Brothers announced that they would no longer be producing musicals, Reynolds hopped over to MGM. Still relatively unknown, her standout performance in 2 Weeks with Love produced a huge hit. This impressed the studio so much, they handed her the role of a lifetime. Not only was Debbie Reynolds making more money than she ever dreamed of, but she was also about to catapult to fame with her performance in Singin' in the Rain. However, Reynolds was not a dancer, and for this reason, the famous dance master himself, Gene Kelly, did not want her as his co-star. The flawless musical number Good Morning in Singin' in the Rain showcased 3 stars at the top of their games: Gene Kelly, Donald O'Connor, and Debbie Reynolds. Reynolds' feet were covered in painful blisters from dancing for hours on end. Gene Kelly was notorious for working himself into the ground, and he expected the same from his co-stars. For the memorable tap scene to the song Good Morning, shooting began in the morning, but didn't end until 11 p.m. The next morning, Debbie Reynolds couldn't get out of bed. In fact, her heart rate was so slow, it caused concern. To the studio's dismay, her doctor demanded the actress rest for 2 days, and film production ceased until she fully recovered. Down the road, Debbie Reynolds sang Gene Kelly's praises. "He made me a star. I was 18, and he taught me how to dance and how to work hard and be dedicated. And when it came to hard work, there was no slowing down." MGM molded Reynolds into exactly the star they desired. They determined how she looked, dressed, and which movies she'd star in. And though it may sound preposterous now, they also had a say in who she dated. Debbie Reynolds wasn't necessarily looking for love when she set eyes on the dashing actor Robert Wagner. At the time, they were still 2 kids trying to make their way through the wild world of the movie business, but Reynolds' crush was undeniable. The 2 actors became close friends, but sadly, no lasting romance came out of their time together. When Wagner began seeing somebody else, their paths split. In 1955, Debbie Reynolds' love life took a sudden turn when she met Eddie Fisher on the set of Hit the Deck. Debbie and Eddie became a sensation, and the press followed every moment of their love story. Fans adored the couple. They looked absolutely perfect for one another. Not everything was as it seemed. In regard to her relationship with Fisher, Reynolds later confessed, "We were America's sweethearts, and on my part, that was true." Only 2 weeks after meeting Fisher, Reynolds accepted the star's proposal, as well as a stunning 11-carat diamond ring. But one of her co-stars gave her the darkest warning imaginable. While filming The Tender Trap, Demi Reynolds' co-star Frank Sinatra gave her some chilling advice. He told her to never get involved with pop stars, including Eddie Fisher. However, Reynolds had a mind of her own, and despite many red flags, she didn't back down. She married her beloved sweetheart. For the naive actress, she believed that marriage was a bond that should never be broken. On the surface, Reynolds' marriage seemed completely ideal, especially when she gave birth to her daughter, Carrie, followed by her son, Todd. Turns out, Reynolds and Fisher couldn't juggle the demands of Hollywood and family life, and deep cracks began to show. Although devastated by the impending doom of their relationship, Reynolds' career had never been better. Nobody knew that her next hit single reflected her inner turmoil in the most heartbreaking way. In 1957, Debbie Reynolds struck gold with her hit Tammy from Tammy and the Bachelor. In 1958, Eddie Fisher's close friend Mike Todd passed in a horrific plane crash. Mike Todd also happened to be Elizabeth Taylor's husband. Reynolds stayed at home while her husband attended Mike Todd's funeral. He also consoled Elizabeth Taylor, the heartbroken widow and one of his wife's oldest friends. At first, Debbie Reynolds denied the awful rumors about her husband's treacherous infidelity. But when Reynolds called Taylor's hotel room, pretending to be Dean Martin, she undoubtedly hoped for good news. Instead, the call only confirmed her worst fears. It was only after she had evidence of Eddie Fisher's presence in Elizabeth Taylor's room that Debbie Reynolds finally agreed to a divorce. In the blink of an eye, Eddie Fisher disappeared from Reynolds and her children's life. An abandonment that stung beyond words. The affair shocked the world and immediately honed in on Fisher and Taylor as the villains of this twisted love triangle. Fisher was the dishonest cheater, while Taylor was branded as a homewrecker. The divorce took a severe toll on Reynolds. She later admitted, "I was going through a terrible time. I couldn't eat, I had ulcers, I had lost a lot of weight, I was so unhappy." Reynolds still believed in the elusive fairy tale ending, and so when she met the millionaire businessman Harry Carl, it seemed as though her prayers had finally been answered. Reynolds had finally found a man that completely adored her, as well as both of her children. They were both outrageously wealthy, and once they married, they became one of the richest couples in Hollywood. With Carl by her side, Reynolds was able to raise her children in absolute luxury. They lived in a sprawling mansion in a fancy neighborhood, with 3 swimming pools and a screening room. But Reynolds' fame also made her children's lives difficult, especially Carrie, who felt like she'd never live up to the public's expectations. There was something that Debbie Reynolds didn't know about her loving husband. He was a gambler. Reynolds began to worry when Carl began losing up to $30,000 a day, sometimes even losing her own hard-earned money. Whenever Reynolds asked Carl if he could afford to be so reckless with his money, he'd shrug off her worries. But this entire debacle reached a head when Reynolds came home one day and discovered there were boards covering the front door. At the height of her husband's gambling addiction, Reynolds remembers sheriffs taking possession of her home. It turns out that Harry Carl had gambled away not only his $22 million fortune, but also $8 million of Debbie Reynolds' fortune. Carrie Fisher couldn't believe her ears when her mother told her that they had no money. What I was hearing was he had humiliated her, destroyed her, deceived her, betrayed her. To make matters worse, Reynolds also told Carrie that Carl invited escorts to the house. Drowning in debt, Debbie Reynolds could have filed for bankruptcy, but instead she did what she always did. She persevered. To make back her money, the actress turned to the Broadway stage. For the next 10 years, Debbie Reynolds sang her heart out and danced on stage, paying back every cent she owed with her own earnings. At the age of 50, she stepped out from under the shadow of financial distress and left another horrifying chapter of her life behind her. Throughout the 70s and 80s, Debbie Reynolds continued to perform, but also embarked on some risky business ventures of her own. She figured that because her ex-husband had been such a gambler, she didn't mind doing whatever she wanted. She purchased a casino in Las Vegas and renamed it Debbie Reynolds Hollywood Hotel. Despite Reynolds' history of heartbreak, she also hadn't given up on love. In the 90s, she took another stab at marriage after meeting Richard Hamlet, a real estate developer. But Hamlet might have been the worst husband yet. In her 2013 memoir, Unsinkable, Debbie Reynolds described her ex in a shocking way. She wrote, "I'd married the devil." Perhaps the most disturbing anecdote described the opening of her Las Vegas hotel. Halfway through her performance, Hamlet dipped out and then disappeared. A day and a half later, he finally showed up in Reynolds' room. She confronted Hamlet about his absence, and that's when the real fear kicked in. Reynolds wrote that her husband had a look in his eyes that scared me, but she became even more terrified when he insisted that they carry on their conversation on the balcony. The distressed actress became convinced that her husband wanted to take her life. "I was sure he was going to toss me off the balcony. One shove and all his troubles would be over. I pictured myself plummeting 12 floors to the pavement." To protect herself from her husband, Reynolds barricaded herself in her closet with her luggage until he exited the room. This was the last straw. She knew she had to get a divorce, but that required meeting Hamlet to break the awful news to him. When she met him to discuss the divorce settlement, he told her, "I'm in it for the money. I'm not leaving. You'll never get rid of me. You can't get rid of me. I control everything. It's all in my name. You're just a figurehead. You're nothing, and I don't love you." Well, luckily for Reynolds, this threat didn't mean much, because she managed to secure a divorce from this wild man in 1996. Only a year after this nightmare marriage came to a close, so did her Las Vegas hotel. In fact, it was a total failure and she had to declare bankruptcy. Perhaps one of the more positive parts of Debbie Reynolds' life was her reconciliation with her old friend Elizabeth Taylor. In the 60s, they met aboard a transatlantic cruise ship and were spotted dining together. Down the road, Taylor even reportedly apologized to Reynolds, saying, "I'm sorry for what I did to you with Eddie." Reynolds' own daughter, Carrie Fisher, followed in her footsteps and became famous in her own right, perhaps best known for her role as Princess Leia in Star Wars. But Fisher had demons of her own and struggled with addiction, as well as bipolar disorder. To Reynolds' dismay, this led her beloved daughter down a very dark road. Sadly, on December 23, 2016, Carrie Fisher stopped breathing while on a flight from London to Los Angeles. Though a passenger performed CPR on the actress until paramedics arrived on the scene, it was already too late. 4 days later, Reynolds' only daughter tragically passed away. But the heartbreak didn't end there. On December 28th, only a day after Reynolds lost her daughter, she suffered a stroke and was rushed to the hospital. She didn't make it. According to Reynolds' son, Todd Fisher, Carrie's sudden death had severely affected his mother. He believed that her overwhelming grief may have been a contributing factor to her medical emergency. Not long before Debbie Reynolds passed, she made a terrifyingly prophetic statement: "I want to be with Carrie." After both stars met their heartbreaking ends, news reports blew up with claims that Reynolds had died of a broken heart. But Todd Fisher had another theory. In an interview on 2020, Reynolds' son believed that she didn't die of a broken heart. He believed she just left to be with Carrie. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. We'd really appreciate it. We also invite you to check out the companion article in the description below. If you want to see even more videos on historical figures, please subscribe to the channel.